All right, we're live on YouTube. This is the public live stream for the Meltano group conversation. My name is Douwe Maan. I am the general manager for the Meltano project at GitLab and also the project lead for the open source project. And today I'm going to talk to some of my GitLab colleagues who I hope will have some questions about what's been going on at Meltano over the last 2 months or so since the last group conversation. In the document and also in the notes for this YouTube live stream and video, there will be a link to a slideshow. And the floor is open for questions from the GitLab team. Francis, you mentioned you had some questions already. I don't see them in the doc yet. Oh, there they are. Okay. Question 1. Do you want to verbalize it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm wondering just kind of what's the end game, how Meltano fits into GitLab's broader strategy. Is it ever going to become revenue generating?
Yeah, good question. So for context, Meltano currently is a separate business unit within GitLab that is being run as an internal startup. And we kind of have the same aspirations for it that we did for GitLab in the early days when Sid and others realized that this open source project called GitLab was pretty promising, and there might be the potential to build a business around it that could start making money on an enterprise edition or support contracts, a hosted version, etc. And with Meltano, we're hoping the same. We're trying to build just a really compelling open source solution for data engineering and ELT. And then as the community grows and as the critical mass and as the momentum keeps going up and to the right, we hope that about a year from now there will be a point at which enough of our users will kind of start clamoring for some kind of paid solution around Meltano, whether that would be an enterprise edition with additional functionality or a hosted version or some other way of providing professional services maybe, which of course is relevant in the ELT space because there's so many connectors for data sources, or in some other way of making revenue that does not line up to something we've done with GitLab already, because we are seeing that we're kind of building a platform that data consultancies and also individual kind of data teams at startups, as well as teams building data tools, they are starting to use Meltano for the ELT bits of their platforms. So since we're building a platform here where ultimately the revenue being made around Meltano might be bigger than the revenue being made by the Meltano team, this platform aspect might also offer up new opportunities for monetizing things. But GitLab is not just building Meltano out of the goodness of its heart, as much as we think that the world deserves a tool like this. We also hope that this has the potential of becoming a GitLab 2.0, where over the coming years, this will grow into its own business unit, hopefully with millions of dollars of revenue if we are looking 2, 3, 4 years into the future from today.
Awesome. I have the next question too, which is I noticed a big burst in Slack activity in January. Is that just because the holidays were ending, or was there some publicity push or some other trigger?
I think you're referring to the graph that I have in the slides there, which is showing that in January the activity went up. But to be clear, the activity went up after having gone down, and we still haven't gotten back to the same level we were at before we went down for the holidays. What I'm seeing is that most people use Meltano as part of their jobs because, of course, they're a data engineer, either at a consultancy or a data team, which means that for most of them during the holidays, there just wasn't very much reason to use the tool or to check in with questions on Slack. So we haven't done any kind of marketing push for new users. This was just people getting back to work and starting to play around with Meltano again. But I do hope that over the course of the month, I'll be able to spend a little bit more time on our website, documentation, and other kind of things that will hopefully increase new users finding out about us and also joining Slack. But yeah, the activity you saw is just people coming back from the holidays.
Got it. My last question, it's kind of technical, but I'm curious because you switched to poetry, how that compares to pip or other dependency management frameworks in Python.
Yeah, so I'm not the expert, and this is actually a really great contribution by Tobias Macy, the host of the Data Engineering podcast, as well as the Python Init Something podcast. So he's like kind of an expert as far as I'm concerned, and he proposed bringing in poetry for better dependency and build management. Pip by itself is a package manager that you can use to install a package from the PyPI index, but it does not actually help with reproducible environments. It doesn't have a lock file, for example, which everyone in GitLab who was used to the Ruby ecosystem, they know that there's going to be a gemfile.lock, which then has like fixed pinned versions for every dependency. This doesn't exist with pip. There are a couple of tools that you can use to build something like a log file with requirements.txt, but that is not automatically used in all environments. Poetry adds more mature build and dependency management tooling around pip, which I think is still responsible ultimately for installing the individual packages. And Poetry also manages the virtual environments automatically for the project that you're installing, in our case, Meltano and all of its dependencies. That's about all I know. But in general, I feel like even a year and a half ago or so, when I got into the Python ecosystem because of Meltano, the state of the dependency management tooling and packaging tooling was just not quite what I had gotten used to from Ruby. But I'm happy to see that already. I feel over the last year and a half, things have been improving, and bringing Poetry into Meltano has definitely made it easier for developers as well as users, as well as our CI environment, to have a reproducible, consistent set of dependencies and versions.
Nice, thanks.
Cool. Taylor, you've got the next question.
Sure. So we're starting to explore the area of ML and AI in our new Learn stage, which I can put some links into here. But have we seen Meltano been used as part of AI and ML workflows? ELT is such a key part of getting your data together in a reasonable form and shape to then go and input it into data science models. I suspect there's a go-to-market here. Have you seen that?
That's a great question. So, like you say, ELT is a crucial part of the ML AI pipeline, because you got to get your data out of source systems into some kind of consistent format for more processing to happen on that. But in a way, the ELT is just as much part of a data pipeline meant for analytics or for other kind of data science practices at the end. So, since we are mostly attracting the data engineers who are part of managing the ELT stack for their teams, I don't always have insight in what gets done with that data down the line once the data engineering ELT step is done. But I know that there are at least a few users who are using it with ML AI workflows. One example is Tobias Macy, who I mentioned earlier, who contributed to the Poetry integration. He works at MIT, and he shared with me that they are using it to do some, I think, processing of data about a course or something, that some course platform, pulling the data out of it. And there are also other users who have shared that they're using it for ML AI. But again, the data engineers responsible for setting up ELT are usually not the same data scientists or AI experts actually using the data down the line. So they don't really have a reason to share it with me. And usually what happens with the data down the line doesn't have a big impact on what the ELT pipeline looks like. So it's kind of nice in a way that we are at this early step in the pipeline where Meltano has a role both in, of course, the booming ML AI field, but also in a more traditional analytics and business intelligence use cases. Because in all of these cases, the first step of any data pipeline is to get the data out of source systems, and that's what we're trying to help out with. So if at GitLab we are, like you said, setting up more ML AI for, I don't know what team you referred to. I don't remember what team you refer to, but either way, our data team at GitLab is already using Meltano as well. Today, presumably mostly for our own analytics and BI uses. But if you're going to set up an ML AI workflow, then definitely talk to them, because they will probably, as far as the data engineering and ELT side of things is concerned, be able to help out, and it would be a shame if you duplicate the work. And they have experience with Meltano already, and they have contracted with a consultancy to help build the custom connectors for the data sources we have. And I'm sure that they would also be happy to support whatever ML AI needs we have that Meltano can help out in.
Awesome.
Does that answer your question, Taylor?
Yep.
Perfect. Any more questions? I'm seeing a lot of people here with their microphones muted and their cameras disabled, but one of you must be curious enough to wonder about something else to do with Meltano.
Hey, this is Chester. I want to. I noticed that the key personas of folks that work with Meltano are like data engineers and folks who probably work with kind of the plumbing and the data quality and figuring out how to extract data and load it into a different source. So at any point, do they care about visualizing that data? And because I recall at one point, Meltano did have a front end data visualization component, but that wasn't explored, or at least it didn't mature fully. So um, currently, how does Meltano work with kind of a front end client or folks that want to visualize the data?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And there's a historical perspective there. As you mentioned, previously Meltano had an analyze, UI for basic analysis, kind of point and click based query generation and graph visualization. That functionality still exists in the Meltano UI, but it's explicitly not our priority right now, because we realized that this vision that we had of building an end-to-end data platform where a single open source tool could be used by an entire data team to do everything from getting the data out of the source systems, transforming it, modeling it so that you can interact with the data from a UI, and then also building those reports and dashboards. We realized that this entire story kind of, breaks or what's the expression? Either way, it very much depends on that first step being viable, that people could actually expect these open source ELT components to be good enough to get the data through those stages. And we were seeing that the entire platform, especially what we offered in the beginning, just wasn't there yet for people to even make it to that final stage successfully. So in order to get the EL, the extract and load bits of Meltano to the place where our data team would actually want to use it in production and use it to replace whatever proprietary solution they might be using today, we got to attract those data engineers that will actually help us make that a reality, the ones who will actually contribute to these extractors and loaders. So these are going to be more technical data engineers that have experience setting up data pipelines, have experience pulling data out of systems at scale, and they're going to have to help build that ecosystem of high quality connectors. And only when that is done will we be able to kind of start looking at the next step in the pipeline, because of course, in any pipeline, every next step depends on the previous one. So in the long term, we still hope that Meltano will offer the full suite of tools that a data team needs to do anything from pulling the data out to visualizing it, going from data to dashboard, as we call it. But for the time being, the focus is very explicitly on the earlier stages, and we are intentionally de-emphasizing the fact that Meltano can do anything for the later stages, because the people we need to attract at this point, and the people we're really trying to target, build the tool for, are these more technical data engineers rather than the data analysts who kind of expect the data engineering problem to have been solved already. So we're working with those data engineers to make sure that's the case before getting into the later stages. So right now, typically people would use Meltano for ELTs, so then the data ends up in a data warehouse, Snowflake, or even something simpler like Postgres, or whatever BigQuery. You have so many options at this point. And then they would use other tooling down the line to actually connect with that data warehouse and do the visualization. And Meltano is totally happy to not be involved there yet, but over time we will hopefully be able to integrate better with open source visualization tools. Meltano, since Meltano as kind of the project layer where you just have a repository that defines all of the plugins that you're using in your data project, Meltano is able to manage the configuration of the different components. So it can also auto-configure certain components down the line based on choices made earlier. We're already using this to automatically configure DBT, which is a transformation tool to connect with the same database that the loader actually loaded the database into. And you can imagine that we might also at some point add Metabase or Redash or Superset as a visualization plugin, which we can then automatically configure to look at the right database that Meltano knows the loader and transformer loaded data and transformed data into. And then the value that Meltano brings to a team, even if it's not with our own visualization functionality, will still be that they have a consistent way of interacting with these different components, and assuming that they are kind of tied together, glued together in a more streamlined way than if you have to manually set up every tool and try to integrate them.
Okay, yeah. So the focus is really on, I guess a metric that you could say that you're using to assess how well that data engineering pipeline is evolving, is to say, we're reducing the amount of time it takes to extract data from one source and load it to another source and configure that pipeline in a much quicker fashion.
Well, what we're finding today is that what we're optimizing for is not so much the speed of getting that pipeline up or the speed of actually running it, but rather the fact that if you have an ELT pipeline, the first step there is getting the data out of source systems. And if it's just a database, then it's easy. You can write a connector for a couple of databases. But there are, of course, an insane amount of SaaS APIs out there, SaaS tools that users would want to pull data out of. And the proprietary data integration ELT platforms, they have their own library of connectors. And because this library is so big, and because data engineers and data teams often don't want to take on that burden of maintaining their own connectors, the first thing we need to do to make open source ELT viable is just to work with the community to expand that library so that more and more users will be able to look at Meltano and its database of supported connectors, which in our case are all of the Singer tabs. Singer is this specification and framework for open source connectors. We want to get to a place where more and more data teams will look at our kind of library of connectors, look at the proprietary library of connectors, and come to the conclusion that Meltano is actually a viable option for replacing those prior proprietary options. And until we get there, anything else we offer down the pipeline is not really going to be compelling if they cannot even use us for the first step there. So the focus right now is on building tooling that allows data teams to work with the existing connectors that exist in this ecosystem of Singer tabs, but then also to build new high quality tabs for new data sources, new APIs, using a framework, the Singer SDK that we're building, which will then be community maintained. And we are seeing that there is a large interest, especially from data consultancies who currently have a habit of just telling every one of their clients, okay, you're going to have to shell out for this big proprietary data integration platform. But they, of course, are interested in kind of banding together and collaborating on this open source suite of connectors. And we are building the tooling to allow these data teams to collaborate on those. And we're building the tooling in Meltano to run those and deploy them at production quality and production scale. So the whole vision of open source end-to-end data tooling really depends on there being a viable story for the first step in that pipeline. So our focus is to get that done. And we're doing that by trying to attract data consultancies and data engineers at individual startups who are willing to try out basically the existing open source connectors that exist, fix them if they run into bugs, and build new ones for new data sources. And we are especially seeing interest from consultancies and companies alike in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, because these are the areas in which the prices that these US-centric vendors charge are often prohibitively expensive. And for them, it's easier to ask one of their team members to spend a few hours building a tab themselves than to just pay for it. While, of course, for a lot of US companies, it would be in the opposite direction because the prices are less prohibitive for them. So we're building this really great community of people who have more time to spend than money, basically, and they really believe in building this open source, free, community maintained library of connectors, so that down the line, no one will have to pay for this anymore, and it will truly become a commodity. That's our goal.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. If any more questions come up, I'm going to give you a few seconds to interrupt me. And if not, well, I'm seeing people are already dropping off. So then thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. And I'm looking forward to giving another update a few months from now. And have a great day, everyone.